Hey folks, welcome back. Gholdengo EX has been the most popular deck online since the release of the new black and white sets, and it's a deck that I have played a lot and talked about a lot in my content. So let's talk about it again today and just take a look at all the new updates that it gets in the new set and why it is so strong right now. Starting with the Pokemon line, we're still playing the 4-4 Gholdengo, just a max line there, and then we're playing two of the new Genesect EX. Now this is one of the biggest buffs that it got from the new set. The biggest buff that I got from the new set. We'll talk about Air Balloon as well later. But the reason that Genesect is so good just allows us to search your deck for two evolution metal Pokemon, so two Gholdengo EX usually, and put them into our hand. This is strong for two reasons. One, it completely sort of changes the dynamic of how the deck sets up. We no longer play Technical Machine Evolution, and we can opt first most of the time now, and just go ahead and get a bunch of Gimmighouls down, and then use Genesect to search for two Gholdengos turn 2, with just like a Nest Ball. As long as we hit Nest Ball for Genesect, that gets us two Gholdengo EX. We don't even play Ultra Ball anymore. Just not necessary, since Genesect searches out all of our evolution Pokemon, and Nest Ball searches out all of our basic Pokemon. This additional consistency to the deck, the fact that we don't need to play Evo TM anymore, the fact that we don't need to play Ultra Ball anymore, the fact that we can search out these Gholdengos so consistently, it allows us to play the deck slightly differently. Obviously, it's, you can only play so differently as Gholdengo. You are still aiming to just use Make It Rain most turns. But the way that you set up is different, and the way that the deck is built is different, and you can be just a little bit more aggressive. Another nice thing about Genesect EX that people don't talk about as much is in the late game, when you get Iono to maybe say like one or two cards, just being able to search out a couple of Pokemon, even if you don't have anything to evolve them from, as fodder to discard Superior Energy Retrieval, can get you just like those extra couple cards you need as discard fodder to get your final knockout. Next we have the 1-1 Scyther line. This is another thing that is a great benefit to the Genesect EX. Scyther has always been pretty solid in the deck in my opinion. However, it doesn't always find a home here, and that is because it is just difficult to get out. Gholdengo doesn't really like using Ultra Ball that much. You typically want to use Superior, want to discard your fodder cards with Superior, not Ultra Ball, and you really just don't want to play that many Ultra Balls because you just need to find your Gholdengos, and that's really all you're Ultra Balling for. Most of your Pokemon are Poffin or Nest Ball searchable, and Pokemon just isn't what you're usually looking for throughout the mid to late game. So being able to just Genesect out the Scyther, and obviously Poffin or Nest Ball for the Scyther, makes this card so much more accessible, so much easier to use. It's just a much more consistently available option with the addition of Genesect. Of course, the reason that Scyther is so strong, doing 10 plus 50 for each ability Pokemon your opponent has in play, is mostly just for the optional single prizer. This can be big in a lot of situations. One of those that people also don't talk about as much is against Joltik Box, having a way to chip a Pikachu EX with a single prize Pokemon. That way you can break the ability and go ahead and knock it out on your next turn. Or vice versa, if you use Make It Rain for not quite enough to knock out, and then use like Iono plus Punishing Scissors on the following turn, that can work as well. It's also pretty solid in general to have an attacker in Gholdengo that doesn't rely on having much energy in your hand, because it synergizes better with Iono. It's pretty awkward sometimes trying to use Iono and Make It Rain on the same turn, since you have to Iono, and then you're not necessarily guaranteed to find the energy that you need to take the knockout with Make It Rain after the Iono. So it can be a bit more difficult to use, whereas the Scyther gives you a nice option that you combine with the Iono, where you have a attacker that doesn't rely on what you draw after Iono, and is also a single prizer to combine with that disruption, and hopefully swing the prize trade back in your favor if you've lost it, or just make the lead even more increasingly in your favor. Having a single prize attacker is great in a lot of situations. Pretty much any matchup where your opponent does put a couple of ability Pokemon into play, Scyther can get utilized, and obviously we'll talk more about matchups and sort of situations to use it when we get to the matchup section. Of course, we have Fezandipiti EX. I won't over-explain it. Being able to draw 3 cards every time Pokemon's knocked out is great. Munkidori. Munkidori has been a staple in Gholdengo EX for a while now, basically since the release of Dragapult, and just since we're already playing Dark Energy, having a way to heal our Gholdengo EXs out of Phantom Dive ranges or Devo TM ranges against Grimmsnarl and Gardevoir, or just like knockout ranges in general against some decks that struggle to one-shot a Gholdengo. Again, namely Grimmsnarl, Gardevoir, Dragapult. All three of those decks Munkidori is super, super good against, and it is a great way to counteract your opponent's Munkidori as well as just generally being a strong card in the format with cards like Bidoof and Cleffa running around. And then we are playing one Iron Bundle, which is a card that I haven't included. It's basically since rotation in my Gholdengo lists. I've tried it in and out, but I haven't loved it. The difference now, I think, is just that the Jellicent DX in Gardevoir now presents a new threat, a new thing that we might want to push out of the active. Jellicent could be a big swing for Gardevoir. It's definitely one of the better tools that Gardevoir has to deal with Gholdengo now. Just being able to have that sit in the active and item lock you while sort of setting your Pokemon up for Devo TM plays. Iron Bundle is just nice to force if your opponent only has one Jellicent EX in play to be able to just go ahead and break that item lock really easily. And then, of course, just in general, being pretty solid against like Raging Bolt lists, especially ones that aren't playing the Noctowl. It can be difficult for them to have more than one single prizer in play. Like if they might have like a Baby Bolt in the active, but the rest of their bench is 2-prize Pokemon, so Iron Bundle gives you like another way to sort of take the prize lead in that matchup. And then, of course, like late game situations where your opponent maybe tries to take the prize lead by putting a single prize or in the active when you only have 2 prizes left. Iron Bundle just being a very consistent way to get out of those situations, especially because we are playing more Nest Ball now than we have in the past. Next, the supporters. We're playing 4 Arven. Still just wanting to search out Superiors and Energy Search Pro very, very consistently. Poffins, Nest Balls, Arven just still such a great card in the deck, especially now that we have Air Balloon as well. Even though we're not playing Evo TM anymore, Air Balloon is like equally important. Air Balloon giving us so much mobility around the board, and Arven being able to search out that Air Balloon and basically draw us an extra card in a lot of situations. 3 Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking, obviously still a fantastic card in Gholdengo, being able to search for whatever we need and just drop them with coin bonus. Usually Energy Search Pro, Spirit Energy Retrievals, Night Stretchers, etc. 3 copies of Boss's Orders. Oh, I will also say about Cipher, of course, also we're using it in a lot of cases when we already have the knockout, we're just using the Cipher to put cards that we need for next turn on top of our deck, just in case our opponent Ionos. But 3 Boss's Orders. This is one more copy of Boss than was standard before the new set came out. Again, this is mostly because of Jellicent DX just wanting to have lots of ways to get around it. Some lists play 4 Boss and Bundle. Some lists, the most successful list in Japan, just played 4 Boss, no Bundle. I was trying like 2 Counter Catcher, 3 Boss. Obviously, that doesn't work as well for Jellicent synergy. But I think that 3 Boss and Bundle is sort of what I've settled on is strong. I think with 3 Boss, you still draw it super consistently, way more often than you did even with 2. But having the Iron Bundle as an option feels better than having the 4th Boss as of now. 1 copy of Pressure Tour Scenario. I still would kind of like a second one back in the deck. It's just so strong against Gardevoir and Grimmsnarl and Dragapult. And honestly, just in general, especially now with Genesect, that 40 HP difference between it and Gholdengo can make it quite a bit more of a liability than Gholdengo in a lot of situations, a lot of matchups. Having a way to just scoop that up consistently is really nice, especially if your opponent tries to like trap it, maybe even with like a combination of Issue Pollen, or if it doesn't get like an Air Balloon on it, like Gardevoir player that's playing Jellicent can like bring it up in the active, and then you can't even attach Air Balloon to it. Because Jellicent also prevents the attachment of tools from hand. So then you can find Boss, but then you're not playing a different supporter. I guess you could say the same about Turo, but Turo at least both picks the Gholdengo up and then also is removing the liability from the board at the same time. So I think like 1 Turo is enough usually if you find it at the right time. It's just that with 2 you find it when you need it so much more often. But right now I'm just playing the 1. It's kind of difficult to find the space for a second one, but I would say that I'd consider playing a second one still. The card is just so strong in the deck. We are playing 1 copy of Iono. I know a lot of players have gone back and forth on including Iono in Gholdengo for the reasons I was sort of talking about earlier, where it's kind of difficult to use Make It Rain after Iono, or at the very least, even it's just not fun to if you are playing the Iono and you need a knockout on that turn as well, and just sort of not knowing if you're going to draw what you need for Make It Rain afterwards, because it's always very up in the air, and it can be hard to like throw away a hand full of the resources to take the knockout and put them all on the bottom and hope to draw back into some. Moving on to the items, we're playing 4 Poffin, 4 Spear, 4 Nest Ball. 4 Poffin and 4 Spear has been fairly standard in Gholdengo for a long time. And the 4 Nest Ball is new, and that is just because we were playing Genesect. Any space that was dedicated to Ultra Bug before, we've just replaced with maxing out the Nest Ball count. Makes the deck super consistent, allows us to use Iron Metal super consistently, but most importantly, we just, in order to go first and feel like reliable in going first, it makes sense to max out our basic monsters so we can get down as many Gimmighouls turn 1 as possible. And then, of course, having that access to Genesect consistently is also very important to search out our Gholdengos right away. 2 copies of Night Stretcher, just more good ways to get energy back, but also getting knocked out Gholdengos or Gimmighouls or our knocked out Munkidori back. I say, like, Gimmighoul and Gholdengo you definitely get back with Night Stretcher here and there, but honestly I feel like Munkidori is probably the thing that when Night Stretcher isn't used to grab energy, I feel like Night Stretcher gets Munkidori the most often, when it's getting sort of counter catcher knocked out by these Grimmsnarl, Dragapult, and Gardevoir players. And it's such an important card in the deck, so. 1 copy of Earthen Vessel, just another way to search energy from our deck, especially if the Energy Search Pro is prized, Vessel becomes like almost necessary, or if our opponent plays like a Genesect. But also just having a way to search out a couple more energy in any situation is always good, off of Arven. But yeah, mostly for games where we prize Energy Search Pro or it is shut off by Genesect. 1 copy of Counter Catcher, just so that we have that Arven searchable way to bring something up guaranteed when we are behind, especially in matchups where our opponent takes 1 prize, and then we take 2, and then they take 2. We're always going to be behind 1 prize going into our turn at that point, so Counter Catcher is live throughout the game. Especially strong into the Raging Bolt matchup, which is one of your tougher matchups, so it's good to have a card that makes it a little bit better. 1 copy of Pokegear, just to find our supporters more often, especially cards like Iono and Turo, which can get stuck near the bottom of the deck. It's always nice to have like that extra way to search out one of supporters, because otherwise, like, if it makes sense, like, it's all awkward knowing that like a card, a 1-of, could always just sit at the bottom of your deck the whole game. There's nothing you can do about it. If it just sort of happens, you shuffle that way. The card happens to keep ending up at the bottom of the deck, and you just don't have access to it. Technically, there's no way to guarantee that doesn't happen, but Pokegear allows you to have that extra way to sort of dig all the way to the bottom of your deck, especially because Gholdengo, like, especially in the last turns of the game, maybe you only have like 1 boss left. You can usually, if you still have the Pokegear left at that point, you can usually get the deck small enough to where Pokegear can look at your entire deck, but you can't get your deck small enough to just draw the whole thing. So Pokegear is giving you that extra little push to the bottom to make sure that you find that support at the end of the game, and of course just making it a little bit easier to. It's another way to like get Arven or Cypher in your early hands to make sure that we can start attacking and taking knockouts quickly. And then, of course, our Spec Energy Search Pro, just being that big way to get all of our energy on in the early game and take a big knockout. It's those, once you take that first knockout and get those energy in the discard pile, it's pretty easy to find them with superior energy retrievals. However, it's that first knockout that's always the most difficult, because you have to get all these energy into your hand to begin with. Once they're in the discard pile, your deck has a higher concentration of trainer cards, a lower concentration of energy, and it's easier to just like find your superiors. But in the early game, it's just super important to have that Energy Pro and search out that first knockout. Next, we have stadiums, tools, and energy. So we're just playing 1 stadium, and it is the Levincia. Obviously, some players play Artisan, some players play Jamming Tower still. I like the Levincia now. I think that we don't need Jamming Tower as much in the current metagame. I think that's a lot of Gardevoir players are switching over to the Jellicent build, which doesn't rely on, which we can't like do the like knocking out Drifloon after Bravery. It's already like gone in Bravery Charm range as often. I just think like Gardevoir players are getting more well equipped to play around that. But regardless, I think that I like the Levincia just for the general consistency it offers, especially against item lock. Especially so, not just Badoo, but also Jellicent. Both are, Jellicent and Badoo are both going to be meta-relevant threats. They are meta-relevant threats currently online, and I'm sure in like your local play. And that Levincia just is another way to access energy from discard pile without playing a supporter, and of course, without playing an item. And of course, just being able to keep that in play. If Levincia ever stays in play over multiple turns, that saves you so many energy discards over the course of the game. 3 copies of Air Balloon. So Air Balloon is the other card that Gholdengo gained from the new set. It's a huge buff, being able to reduce the retreat cost of all of your Pokemon by 2. This means that it's a lot easier to move like Munkidori and Fezandipiti from the active Pokemon if you open them, or Genesect, of course, which otherwise would be a bit of a nuisance too from the active with its 2 retreat cost. But also is just super strong in Gholdengo in general, because of course that coin bonus draws you 1 extra card if it is in the active position, which means if we have an Air Balloon on our active Gholdengo at the start of the turn, we can coin bonus for 2 and then retreat to another Gholdengo and get that extra card again from being in the active spot with a second coin bonus. I'm sure many players who played Gholdengo in the past have done this with Switch or done it with Turo, which of course we can still do that with Turo, but it is so much more consistent to be able to do it with Air Balloon. This is basically a tool that will draw you +1 card multiple times over the course of the game, and that may not seem like much, but it adds up in big ways. That's going to give you significantly higher chances of getting knockouts throughout all of your games at all points of the game. 3 copies of Metal Energy. This has been pretty standard in Gholdengo for a while. It's just sort of the natural count to play, where you can attach metal to 2 Gholdengos and also prize 1, and still be all right. Where you can have just consistent access to it as often as possible. 3 is just sort of the natural count at least in the Energy Search Pro build of the deck, of course. 2 copies of Lightning Energy so that we can make the most use out of Levincia, and then 1 copy of every other energy for Energy Search Pro. I've chosen to not include a second copy of Dark Energy just because I think that some other cards are more important, and I like being able to play Levincia double Lightning instead. But second Dark Energy is, of course, also nice if you do want to prioritize being able to set up Monkey more consistently without having to worry about prizing the Dark. Next, let's move on to the matchups. So starting with our positive matchups, first we have Gardevoir. Now, Gardevoir has been a positive matchup basically since rotation happened. It's one of the biggest reasons to play Gholdengo. It has been one of the biggest reasons to play Gholdengo. It's been one of the biggest boons for the deck. And it just sort of lies in Gardevoir's struggles to one-shot a Gholdengo, especially with the help of Munkidori and Turo. Of course, they can do it with Drifloon and Bravery Charm, but it's not super easy for them to do that. And, of course, your deck is a lot more aggressive than theirs, so you're usually going to have a couple prize card lead at that point anyways. And by the time they get Drifloon set up, you probably have quite a few energy in the discard pile, and that opens you up to start making, boss on Gardevoir plays and just one-shotting it, even as they do have Drifloon in the active spot. And then, of course, they can attack with Drifloon again at that point, but you can still just knock out the Drifloon with Scizor and Iono them. Gardevoir, is a deck that currently also struggles against late game Ionos. So especially if they have to use Fezandipiti, then you have another 2 prizer on the bench that you can boss, knock out, and a lot of times they'll struggle to get the Drifloon set up quick enough that you don't even take maybe even a 3 prize card lead, right? Then of course having the Scizor to throw in there at any point to potentially throw the prize trade more in your favor is also really nice, and especially with the 3 copies of Air Balloon now, there is much less opportunity for them to ever try to trap something and just roaring scream around on your bench Pokemon. Even with the Jellicent EX, I think that definitely I think it improves the matchup for Gardevoir. It's kind of tough to say because where it's I think generally speaking, the Jellicent build is better against Gholdengo, but because we're not playing Jamming Tower, the Drifloon build is slightly worse, I think, of a matchup in this format than it was last format. I think, the Drifloon build with Jamming Tower was a better matchup before, but now we are, you know, we're sort of saying, okay, well, it's a slightly worse matchup now, but it's still favorable. And this Levincia list is better than the Jellicent build, which I think might even be slightly unfavorable without Levincia. At least with this current list, there's other techs, of course, you can play. It's just sort of mixing and matching what techs you want to play to see which matchups you want to iron out. And I think with this current list, the Jellicent matchup is very favored. You know, of course, Jellicent can still pose problems. Frillish can even pose problems, just like lots of item lock throughout the game. But with the combination of Levincia and the Iron Bundle, you just have a lot of options to get around it. We play a heavy boss count. So I actually think the Jellicent build is quite favored currently still. And I think the Drifloon build isn't as favored as it was last format, but I think it is still favorable. And then, of course, another reason to not play the Gemming Tower is that those aren't the only two builds, right? It's not just the Jellicent or the Drifloon build. There's also some players might still play something more like what Isaiah Bradner won NAIC with, right? With no Drifloon, of course no Jellicent because it wasn't out at the time, and just like a heavy, like the 4 Munkidoris, Turbo Energized. I think, you know, a lot of players have strayed away from that at this point, but I don't think that like that's necessarily what all players will do. I think especially if you're looking at Gholdengo going into World, I think that's still a strong option. Like going for the 4 Munkidori Turbo Energized play, I don't think that's necessarily like you should necessarily completely write off that idea just because a new set is released. I think that's still a solid list that will probably see some play. So next we have Marnie's Grimmsnarl. So another matchup where I think this one's just like significantly favored. This one you have to worry about like Frostlass, Adrenabrain, Devo shenanigans, which your opponent will obviously try to do. They can also like try to use Maractus on your Genesect, which can be annoying. So you definitely want to Turo that up. I mean, I would say as quickly as possible, but I mean, you won't get a lot of free turns to use Turo unless your opponent does go for the Maractus play. So you usually have to use it in response to Maractus, but that shouldn't be incredibly difficult to do as long as you keep the Turo around. That is something worth looking out for, is that you don't want it can be kind of like, it's not necessarily game losing because you still have a Adrenabrain, but it's usually your opponent's gonna have like a very, very hot, a much better chance of winning the game than you if your Turo's already gone and they might Maractus your Genesect. So that's something to look out for. Obviously, not all lists will play Maractus either, so that's something you can sort of scope out over the course of a best of 3, or especially if you're playing like the deck online. Obviously, you know what your opponent's list looks like, but that's something to watch out for, is that the Maractus can catch your Genesect. And that being said, of course, you can put 3 energy on a Genesect and start attacking with it, but then they might like Maractus one of your Gholdengos, you put a metal on that, and then Maractus another Gholdengo, and now all of your metal energy commit to the board. There's a lot of things that can happen with Maractus. It's just important to play around. But generally speaking, Grimmsnarl is a pretty favorable matchup. Your opponent needs to get on a lot of pressure pretty quickly, in my opinion, to have a favorable position. They gotta like try to get out their Frostlass quickly so they can start accruing damage right away, getting multiple Munkidori down so they can Adrenablane a lot of damage and try to set up for like a Devo TM play, or at least put all of your Gholdengo EXs into damage ranges where they can take like a 4 prize turn after like back-to-back Shadow Bullets. They also one way to like reduce how many options they have is to not necessarily evolve into all your Gholdengos right away, since the Frostlass won't tick on them when they're Gimmighouls. So if you can sort of stagger the evolutions where, you know, you get like maybe 2 Gholdengo out turn 2 to get that draw power that you need to start attacking, and then you wait until you can maybe knock out a Frostlass to put the 3rd Gholdengo down. And that's something that you can sort of do. Your opponent doesn't want to swing into Grimmsnarl right away, right? Because then it's going to be pretty easy for you to knock it out if they go for like a turn 2 Rare-Candy Grimmsnarl play, and they're not going to have a lot of other board presence at that point if they're using the research to get their Grimmsnarl out rather than maybe set up more Munkidoris, or even a second Frostlass can be good against you. But if they aren't putting pressure onto you by attacking with Grimmsnarl, then that obviously opens up opportunities for you to use your heavy Bazur discount to target down like their Frostlass, which I'd say usually I think targeting Frostlass is the best idea. Sometimes going for the Munkidori can be better, and that also sort of depends on what your opponent's board looks like at the time. But yeah, trying to target down those avenues of damage that your opponent has over the course of the game is important. And of course, looking for opportunities where you can get Munkidori down and get that set up is very important. So always making sure that you are getting your energy attachments consistently, because getting your energy attachments is important early on, so that in the mid game, when you can get the Munkidori, the Dark Energy onto your Munkidori. Like if you turn 1 attach a Metal to Gholdengo, sometimes like people just like won't attach a Metal Energy to their bench Gholdengo. They'll like Metal Energy to their active, turn 1, turn 2, just take a knockout and leave Metal Energy in hand, presumably so that they potentially have more energy to discard in hand on their next turn. But you, in that position, it's almost always, or at least if there's a risk of your opponent potentially knocking you out, or even just trying to trap something, it's usually better to attach a Metal Energy, if you can't set up a Munkidori right then and there, to one of your bench Gholdengos. That way, if your active gets knocked out, then you can still set up a Munkidori next turn. You don't have to use your Metal Energy on the Gholdengo for attachment. Next we have Dragapult, another very favorable matchup. Dragapult is another thing that is just struggles to knock out a Gholdengo, and it's very easy for you to knock out and get punished by your Turo and Munkidori very hard. If they play Genesect, obviously it can be a little bit scarier, but I think it is actually still favored, even if they do play Genesect. Another matchup where you're going to get a bit of a prize lead, and Grimmsnow's gets a matchup where they'll a lot of time try to Badoo you early on as well if they play it. But Dragapult, of course, even more so, they're usually going to play Badoo. They're usually going to try to Itchy Pollen and slow you down early, and that's where like Levincia and Munkidori are really, really big. Munkidori, of course, just being able to punish your opponent for having those Badoos on the board in the mid to late game with free prizes, and Levincia making it so that you aren't exhausting many resources by knocking out these Badoos. And Levincia also making it so that you have an out in the mid to late game if your opponent tries to like Itchy Pollen when they think that you're out of energy. You might be able to surprise them with Levincia play, although if your opponent has seen two Lightning Energy over the course of the game, then they might assume you're playing Levincia. Next we have Dragapult Dusknoir. Obviously this matchup is pretty similar to the straight Pult matchup, so I won't discuss it as much. Usually not playing the Genesect in this build though, although I think even straight Pult lists are a lot of time not playing Genesect anymore, although more lists have been adding it back in now that Gholdengo has seen a resurge in popularity. But Pult Noir, pretty similar. I think you need to set up a little bit quicker because of the threat of like Dragapult coming down on like turn 3 with a couple of Curse Blasts and just sort of board wiping you really quickly. That's obviously a lot easier for Dragapult Dusknoir to do. Not even really possible for straight Pult to do, but Dragapult Dusknoir can wipe you off the board a lot quicker, potentially, if they get a strong enough start. And even not one-shot your Gholdengo is a lot easier. Now, typically, it's not that much of a threat. I think the Dusknoir definitely helps them a lot. It allows them to... most importantly, allows them to, one, play around Turo and Munkidori, or even like knock out your Munkidori on the bench on the same turn as hitting into a Gholdengo, but also the ability to like knock out a Gholdengo in the active spot and a Gimmighoul on the bench on the same turn with the help of Curse Blast and maybe Hawlucha combines really well with Iono, because those knockouts don't only give your opponent a lot of prize cards, but they also remove 2 draw options on your board, right? Like every Gholdengo is a chance to draw more cards. So if they can knock out 2 on the same turn, then you aren't going to have that many Gholdengos in play left. You might even just like only have 1 at that point. And so you have a lot less draw power to try to take the return knockout. Now, luckily, I think this matchup has only gotten better this format, and same applies to straight Pult as well, just because we now have the addition of Genesect, so it's a lot harder for them to slow us down early on, because one of the ways that Itchy Pollen can trip you up is by making so you don't find drawn to a Gholdengo. But now we have, even if we don't get the Genesect down before item lock comes down, we now have 6 outs in our deck to drawing into a Gholdengo instead of just the 4 under item lock. Next, for our even matchups, we have Raging Bolt. So I think you could say this is like a slightly unfavorable matchup. I think it's pretty close. I'm calling this even because I think that a lot of Raging Bolt lists, there's a pretty decent split of like the Noctowl build versus the non-Noctowl build that won the Champions League in Japan. And I think that the non-Noctowl build is actually favored just because it's so difficult for them to set up without mentioning any prizers. And with our heavy count of bosses orders and our ability to set up early on a lot more consistently, I think it's a lot easier for you to hit like just a turn 2 boss knockout on one of their 2 prize Pokemon and take the prize lead significantly that way. If you get the first 2 prize cards, you're usually going to be in a significant lead. That being said, the Noctowl build I think is probably still where the non-Noctowl build is favored. The Noctowl build is still unfavored, just because if they set up a single prize board and get attacking, like turn 1 going second or turn 2 going first, they are usually going to get the first 2 prize cards. They're going to take a knockout with usually Baby Bolt, maybe Rotom, and then, best you can do is take a 1 prize return knockout, maybe with Gholdengo, and then they, take another 1 prize knockout, or they knock out your Gholdengo. Either way, they are going to have the lead, and as long as they don't miss a knockout at any point, they're going to maintain that lead. Now, Scizor does give you an option that you didn't have before of being able to like Iono and attack with a single prizer later on, so that can be a way to sort of win the prize trade back in your favor. You try to combine that Iono Scizor play with Counter Catcher on like Fezandipiti usually, or Mew EX if they don't have Fezandipiti in play, or if they don't have enough Pokemon for you to knock out the Fezandipiti, but they do have enough Pokemon. Is it possible for them to have? No, there's not. I don't think it's. I don't even time, but I don't even think it's possible for them to have no Pokemon where you knock out Fez, but not Mew, right? With Scizor. But generally, you want to go for a draw Pokemon, usually Fez, and knock that out with Scizor using Counter Catcher and Iono on the same turn, and hope your opponent doesn't find the Prime Catcher or Boss Play or whatever they need. Next, we have Joltik Box. So. This matchup has been contentious. I think I played Vengeful Punch when I played the deck. I don't even remember which regional it was anymore. But I did pretty well against all of my Joltik box players. I think I beat a couple in day 2 and one in day 1 at least. And the Vengeful Punch obviously makes the matchup honestly pretty free. Now, without the Vengeful Punch, it's more difficult, right? They can set up a bunch of Pikachu EX and just sort of slam your Gholdengos. You have no way to one-shot the Pikachus, and if they can limit their board of their other 2 prizes and just keep swinging Pikachus, then you're going to have a tough time. That being said, it's a lot easier said than done to chain together a bunch of Topaz Bolts without putting down a bunch of other 2 prizers that you can just boss and counter catch or knockout. So that's usually going to be your strategy. It's also especially if they do open a 2 prizer that's not Pikachu or bench a couple of other ones, it's also going to be pretty often that you can get the first 2 prize cards because your opponent, you go first, or even if you go second, I mean, your opponent isn't really doing much on their first turn as Joltik Box. They're still going to have to attack with Jolting Charge turn 2, even if they go first, right? So you're going to get a turn to set up, and then turn 2, you can go ahead and a lot of time hit that boss knockout play on their 2 prizer. That being said, they can still, from that point, bench a couple Pikachu EXs and Jolting Charge to them and convert to a board of Pokemon that you can't one-shot. Now, what makes the matchup more even instead of unfavored, though, is that even in the best-case scenario for them, we still have Scizor. So we can use Scizor in combination with Iono to hit into the Pikachu and break the ability with a single prizer. I think I did mention that earlier. But Scizor being able to chip the Pikachu is a pretty important option to have. Last format, we could do it with the Dreepy's first attack to just hit for 10 and maintain a single prize board. But of course, if your opponent set up an Iron Hands EX, they could use that to punish it. But of course, if they have an Iron Hands EX in play, then that's a boss target as well. But yeah, the Scizor is a pretty important option in this matchup for breaking the Pikachu EX ability. Next are unfavorable matchups. We have Boltzard. So Chi-Yu is just a scary card for Gholdengo. If they don't play the Chi-Yu, I think this matchup's like actually fine, potentially favored. Assuming they don't play Chi-Yu or Genesect. But Chi-Yu is just so scary for the deck. The fact because your opponent can just like Charizard, set up a Chi-Yu, 1 energy on Charizard obviously, and then knock it with Chi-Yu, and then even if you can boss around the Chi-Yu that turn and hit the Charizard, then the Chi-Yu's still there, so then you just attack with Chi-Yu again. Now, there's not a whole lot like you can do about that, but hope that you take 2 prize cards before they get the Chi-Yu set up. You don't like necessarily have to. They might miss a knockout at some other point, but their deck is pretty good at hitting those back-to-back Charizard EXs, back-to-back knockouts. Of course, if they don't play Chi-Yu, I think this matchup is more even to favored. However, I think that most lists will play Chi-Yu, so that is why I'm just putting it into the unfavored category. And of course, for their later knockouts, Charizard's going to be able to easily one-shot usually. Next, we have Zoroark, and this matchup is unfavorable because of the Darmanitan. Of course, they can go for that. If they go first, then go for like a turn 2 Darmanitan play on your Gimmighoul, which is great, but that's not necessarily why the matchup's bad. The matchup's worse because they're sort of streaming Ionos against you, continuously making you have a small hand size, making it difficult to hit boss and stuff, where, well, the Darmanitan easily one-shots Gholdengos, right? I think it's not super unfavored, it's not as bad as it was when they were, like, before Shaymin released, because they were playing, like, a thick Darmanitan line, but now, a lot of time they're only playing a 1-1, if sometimes they're not even playing Darmanitan, but I'm going to assume, for the sake of this, that they are playing at least a 1-1 Darmanitan, because usually they are. And that means they can't at least do the Darmanitan play multiple times, and they do struggle to one-shot a Gholdengo without a Darmanitan, right? But they do have ways to do it. A lot of times they'll play like damage boosters, like Black Belt or Kieran, or like Defiance Band, even like Binding Mochi Petra DX sometimes, or like Blood Moon late game, in combination with other damage modifiers. So they do have ways to one-shot Gholdengo with that Darmanitan, but it's not like super easy for them. So if you can get the prize lead, or like Iono them on the turn that you knock out Darmanitan or something like that, or like boss their Darumaka early on, and they just don't they fail to find like much in response. There's a lot of ways that like the matchup can swing in your favor. I don't think it's like super unfavorable. I think it's better than the Pulsar matchup. Which also is winnable, but I think the Pulsar matchup's definitely significantly worse than the Zoroark matchup. Next, we have Straight Zard, so I think this is one of your worst matchups, assuming they play the Chi-Yu once again. Again, I think if they don't play the Chi-Yu, it's probably maybe slightly in your favor, but a lot of them are playing Max Belt, so that can mean that like even after you've just taken 1 prize, they can Max Belt one-shot a Gholdengo. So even without Chi-Yu, it's not super easy for you. But yeah, they're usually playing Chi-Yu. They're usually able to weave in that Chi-Yu, create that same board, like I said, where even if you boss around the Chi-Yu, knock out with Charizard, but now they just have a single prize board, and they just knock you out with Chi-Yu again. And they're going to pretty consistently hit that play and knock you out. Your leg against Pulsar, your biggest chance to win is if you're just able to take a significant prize lead, and they're not able to set up like the turn 2. They're not able to take a knockout turn after your first attack, or they stumble at some point along the way. Maybe you can if they set up like Pidgeot, Charizard, Chi-Yu, you can try to like knock out. I don't know. Even if at that point you can try to knock out their Pidgeot, but then they still have Charizard and Chi-Yu in play. You can try to like knock out the Chi-Yu with Scizor, maybe to even out your prize trade, and then like hope that they don't find the boss if they don't have Pidgeot set up. I mean, you just kind of have to hope that something goes wrong on their end with their setup, to be honest. Last we have EV Box, which is definitely much less popular than it has been for a while, but it is still one of your worst matchups. Both decks play kind of similarly in that matchup, at least, where you're both just trying to like knock out 2 prizes back to back. But the problem is that like you can't really, you have to try to take the first 2 prize cards, but if you don't and you just like knock out a 1 prizer, then they're almost always going to win, right? Like, it's very easy for them to stream knockouts on Gholdengo's Burning Charge. Super easy to set up the first time, and then it sets up the next Burning Charge, and which sets up their next attack. And it's just super easy for them to knock out Gholdengo back after back after back. Now, where you don't have the luxury of being able to, like, take a 1-prize knockout, you have to take 2-prize knockout for your first knockout, or hope that they miss attack somehow after your first knockout on a single prizer. They can take a 1-prize knockout because of Briar. So they don't actually, of course they still want to get like a 2-prize knockout on Gholdengo, but if you only have a board of Gimmighouls, they can still just evolve into Flareon, take a 1-prize knockout, you take 2 in response, they take 2 in response, you take 2 in response, and then they just Briar and take 3, right? So they aren't at the same disadvantage as you are, where they can't take a 1-prizer for their first knockout. Now, Scizor, once again, Scizor Iono counter catcher plays. This is going to be your best way to try to come back in the matchup. Same with a lot of these. When you're on the back foot, Scizor Iono counter catcher is pretty much always going to be the best way for you to try to get back into the game. That's all I have for you today, though. I hope that this was helpful in your playing Gholdengo or playing against Gholdengo. I think that the deck is pretty strong right now. I hope that you enjoy the list and give it a shot. If you want to check out my other content, my link tree is in the description below to my socials, my Metafy if you want coaching, and of course you can check me out YouTube and Twitch. I'm trying to make a lot more content in the next couple of weeks. I was away for a while, but I'm back now, and I'm back on the grind. I'm gonna be putting out a lot more content this month. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.